Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Verdugo, and my thesis is Democracy as Design, Brooklyn City Hall. My thesis asks the interesting question, how can architecture function as a platform for democracy? Creating architecture for a society that strives for true democracy, where all the people living under a government completely control that government. This kind of thesis stems from some undemocratic problems we have in our political system currently, where, for example, one where there's really two extreme opinions in the country that matter. And if you're not within them, your opinion doesn't get reflected in the government. And each day, those opinions start seeing each other as enemies more and more. And the second, that the election of one person to president really is the most impactful part of the political system. And that it kind of is like, even though the government is supposed to function as doing the will of the people, it ends up being the will of one person. I kind of addressed for Brooklyn to create a government that kind of fixes these two problems. One solution I found, well, both solutions was in the Swiss government. One, where the Swiss government has a system of direct democracy where people can vote for laws or changes in the constitution without the need to elect a representative to do that for them. And another where the head of state role is distributed among a group, not just one person. And I kind of took that and tried to create architecture for that in Brooklyn. So for creating architecture that expresses democracy, and if democracy is the control of the people, I found that then the people should control their architectural expression. We do this here by asking the Brooklyn subreddit a question, what style of architecture do they prefer? And the majority of the people's opinion in Brooklyn chose traditional architecture, 79%.
Tell a little bit about your poll here. How did you set this up?
So I set this up with a question, an overall question. What style of architecture do you prefer? In it, I kind of described like it's a government building in Brooklyn Civic Center, where it is. And yeah, and I kind of kept it a two-poll question just because it's easier for me to interpret that. And I kind of go into studying why people prefer traditional architecture, and specifically why in Brooklyn. And around Brooklyn Civic Center, studying the landmark portions of the sites, what portions are chosen to be permanent in Brooklyn's world, and what buildings aren't. Specifically, I was studying the architecture of the Federal Building, the Federal Post Office, and Brooklyn Borough Hall. Another part of the design, I was thinking that in a true democracy, the government should be transparent for the people. And to reflect this in architecture, I wanted a place where the citizen can fully look into the workings of the government. And I kind of took inspiration from the Dumbo Empire stores, where the public can come up here and there's like office workers working alongside tourists, or like anyone basically. Now looking at the sites, after several urban design iterations, I kind of noticed the axis on Borough Hall, and Borough Hall really is the monumental part of the Civic Center, ending with Fulton Street and Washington Street. I also noticed that the Supreme Court kind of blocks the interaction and the circulation between the J Street, Metro Tech area and the Brooklyn Civic Center area. The master plan I kind of went for was creating an emphasis on the axis toward Borough Hall by kind of almost replicating what's going on the other side, like along the skyscraper district and this side of the old Fulton Streets. And kind of creating an emphasis between the Borough Hall and the front of the Federal Building, and keeping like the circulation going from Fulton Street up to Cadogan Plaza. And my building would be the thing supporting this space, or like shaping the plaza and creating pathways into it. And this is kind of just a simple line drawing of my idea, creating this bow tie shaped plaza with hybrid space in between. When studying the Supreme Court, after a lot of iterations, I realized that the Supreme Court really is like an intuitive placement in the project. It protects the plaza from like a noisy street of Adam Street. So I propose to keep the structure of the Supreme Court and simply open it off to the adjacent streets along on the other side of Adam Street, and to create additions along this structure to create that bow tie shaped plaza. And this is kind of the site plan where it opens up to the other side of Adam Street. One of the ideas I kind of got from spring break after visiting Mexico City, where after looking at their civic center, the Independence Plaza, I realized that the thing that really activates the plaza is not the government buildings. It is the commercial things that are around the government buildings. And after studying other civic centers in America, where you don't really see that everything's monumental and everything's big government buildings, you see that people really just want to walk by. There is not a place to like stay. And I wanted this plaza to be a place to stay, be a place for Brooklyn to gather. So I kind of organized the main building in this way, where the one along Adam Street is the entrance to the government functions, specifically the city hall. And the commercial activity would be everything in the plaza. Yeah, and
Tell us a little bit about the commercial aspect of it. Like, why did you want to do that?
because I saw that the government civic centers, like for example, the Independence Plaza, really the most lively place where you see people gravitating towards is like the small commercial shops along it.
This is in Mexico City.
Yeah. I also studied the San Marcos place in San Marcos Square in Venice, and realized that the small shops really make it a lively place. People do have something to go. There is a refuge, you know, from this open plaza. People like feel a little safer to go on the edge because it is like shade and it is like small things. And yeah, that was kind of my idea for putting commercial on this building.
And where are in that plan, where are the shops that you're creating?
I created the shops all around here and here. So the majority of the ground floor is dedicated to commercial. Really, this part is only the entrance to the government buildings above. And so like if a government worker were to go to work for the city hall or the other municipal buildings up top, they would have to go along Adam Street or.
Not in the court, because those are two courts for the government.
Well, I kind of shaped the courthouse to have it opening in the middle of it.
There's a site model is there.
Yeah, might be easier. So this is the updated site model from this semester, where you see like the openings toward this side of J Street, and I kind of broke up the massings into like these pieces, and I kind of highlighted this piece to be the city hall, kind of nested in between these municipal buildings. I guess one of the main parts of the project was to create this hybrid space where people can actually look into the government. And I kind of thought of it as there's this arcade along the plaza that's a refuge to the plaza. And there's a spot where you can go up, and there's these bleachers / stairs that you can take up, and you have a sight line to the city hall, but you also have entrances to the archive of the city, and also a place where the community can gather and actually learn about the political system and have like community board discussions.
So explain more what you have there. What's on the left?
So the left is the archive of the city.
Okay, and the middle?
The middle is the city hall.
Okay.
And the right is the Center for Civic Discourse. And yeah, I kind of wanted the city hall to be completely transparent, but how do you kind of do that using more of a traditional architecture, which is punch windows and stuff like that? I had this idea, which is not fully fledged yet, but it's idea that it transitions from a more of a traditional architectural design up to more of a transparent glass facade, so that here you can see inside the Center for Civic Discourse, you can see inside the City Hall, and it is more of like a transitional space to go up there. Kind of seeing like an idea I had for the Bowtie Plaza was we had to create an edge without creating a building. So creating like this colonnade here, where it kind of marks the edge of the plaza and kind of protects people from the old Fulton Street, the West Cadman Plaza Street. Going into the plan, into the model, I kind of looked at the buildings around, and this is a good way to kind of see if the building works with the surroundings, especially like Brooklyn, Borough Hall, and how this building kind of, pairs with it. Does it feel nice? Does it feel appealing to go into this plaza? I created like this icon to show the transition from this plaza to like the bigger federal building plaza. And my building would be situated in like the middle, in the transitional piece. This is like along Adams Street, which is more like, there is no arcade. It is more of like a protection for the plaza. And this side is more like transparent. There is like this colonnade that allows people to flow in between plaza and arcade freely. And if you go into the plaza, you have like this space where people can go up to view the civic activity. But it also is a place to like sit and relax, and a place to linger, most importantly. And now I think of like the city hall. What is inside the city hall? Originally, I thought of it as like a chamber, like the classic Senate chamber. Now I'm more thinking of it. It is like the daily activities of like the heads of states. Like you can see them using the computer. You can see them, talking to each other. And it is more of a casual, like government is more of a casual experience with the citizens. Yeah. Thank you.
Can you go back to the section, please?
Yeah.
So this theater space is where the councilmen are going on and doing their business, or is this where people can just come in and perform and eat their lunch, like the steps of Borough Hall?
Like this place?
Yeah.
It's just steps for like the steps of Borough Hall, where people are allowed to linger and like take a seat and stuff like that.
I think you get a lot of, I'm just gonna start, because
Yeah, it's hard for people to name.
I think you get a lot of great moves going there with the developing the different accesses going through the project. And it's kind of interesting to see this very traditional language in your architecture. There's a lot, if you were going to sort of study that traditional architecture, that would make it more relevant to a particular style or rhythm, or I think you could go, if in that language you can go a lot further and deeper. And if you go this direction, I want you to do that. This whole glass area, like I think of a Greek stola, which was full of shops, right? So this colonnade area was full of shops, and that's what helped in Athens, helped make that sort of whole plaza part of people, and that's what you're thinking.
Yeah.
And it sounds like to me, but then why aren't we seeing the farmers market in there? I think that would help. Why aren't we seeing like little stalls in this arcade, if that's what you're thinking?
I was inspired by the Tuesday markets that they have in the Brooklyn Civic Center.
Yeah, so I think you maybe even want to push them. It should be every day, right? If I'm gonna have this, let's make it more active. I don't want my project to be tame. I'm making an everyday market here, right? And you look at everyday markets, you fill it up with stuff so it's easy for that to happen. I think that would help, and of course, I'm really interested in how hot this thing is gonna get, right? On a day like today, and with all that glazing, and you've got a little big mass there, but it looked like the whole roof was glazed, right? So you're gonna have this huge greenhouse effect in there. So I think, you need to address those things. I don't understand why you didn't can you flip that, yeah, that area, 2 minutes next time, color coding with the key, what they are, 5 minutes,
Yes.
right? And then it would be much quicker for us to jump in.
So let me ask you, following on that, what if the colonnade that faces the plaza is completely open to the plaza? And that it's actually an open colonnade, sort of like we have at Metro Tech, right? And then the storefronts are back, and so that colonnade, is cover in the winter time. But in the summer, it's completely open. The wind goes through there. There's no heat buildup. You can still have a glass roof on it. I mean, the one in Milano has a glass roof on it. But it becomes much more, again, more like Venice. The usual one around the perimeter is not enclosed. And then you can fill it up with stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, as I look at it, I like the ideas that you're expressing, but I find the edges that you're creating are, on one hand, kind of interesting, on the other hand, they're kind of anonymous. Like, the big arches, because the wall is set back, it looks like about 30 feet from the arches. It's more like Washington, D.C. than, the Plaza in Piazza in Venice, right? So, San Marco. The stores, I think, one, in order to survive, they need to be closer to the edge of the building, or that arcade needs to be much more inviting, but it doesn't have to be so wide and so deep, because I think it will pull away any life that you're trying to put to the edge of the building if you have it so deep. And certainly on the Adams Street side, I find that a little confused. On one hand, it looks like you're just kind of blocking it off. On the other hand, you've got big box stores about 30 feet back from that edge. And so 2 questions came to my mind. Is like, one, do you have any ability to kind of rethink the flow, character of Adams Street to make that a more inviting street to be on? Right now, it's kind of the raceway to get to the light, to get to the bridge. But is there some ability to, by slowing down the traffic, creating a more viable edge? And so that actually becomes inviting in some respects for the retail that you want to do. So, kind of summarizing it all, I think you need to consider how the program meets the edge of the building. And by pushing all the program inside the building, you create these colonnades. In a way, you're making that edge more anonymous rather than more inviting, in my view.
The edge needs to be permeable.
Yeah.
Because what's really interesting is right now it's very introverted. When you look at your section, it's all about the staircase and that may not be a bad thing. Maybe it doesn't need to engage 100% on all 4 sides, but I think what you're saying is, if it's Adams Street, you want your government to be transparent. This is the entrance to your government. It is not transparent. Maybe if you change this side, it alleviates the need to change the other side. So you just kind of need to massage what's happening around the edges there. Can you go to your first floor plan? I think what's really great about your master plan and how you place your buildings is you really understand the civicness of placing a public building, right? It's about the activity. Even if you're not engaging with the government services, it is about the proximity, it is about the accessibility to get to those public services. But you also need to understand the public services that are being offered. So I think where you need to go next for the final is really pushing your program and understanding what that is, right? Even if you're not developing your retail, at a high level, you should understand how big are these stalls, right? How much opportunity do you have for retail? Then you can go to the next floor. And then you talked about this being the archive and Institute for Civic Discourse and your city hall. I think this is going to be what makes your project. You really need to understand what goes into these spaces. Okay? Are they big and open? If it is collaborative, if it is casual government, like you say, what does that mean in the architecture? Right? What is casual government? If it's not a big chamber that's formal, right? Express it in your floor plan. And it could be really cool, because if you go to your section, I think there's a lot of potential for what you're doing. You know, we're talking about Adam Street. This is completely separate from what's happening here. But if you start to develop the program, this is gonna become maybe really rich. But you're just not quite there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
One other thing I find interesting is you've taken great care in describing the lower two, how many stories that per story is,
Yes.
the second level. And either you purposely or because you haven't kind of gotten there yet, left the boxes kind of anonymous. And I guess part of the opportunity for me is like, do the boxes above the kind of classical base need the same thing? It's kind of what architects in the 1920s were trying to figure out with neoclassical couple first floors, and then what do you do to extrude the tower, and how do you, and I guess I'd ask the question to you, are you gonna use the same language going up, or does that create could you create a different kind of dialogue with a different type of architecture for what goes above? I mean, I don't have any formed thoughts about that, but I think, you know, you're either blocked on that or you just haven't kind of gotten to that level of discourse between the bottom couple of stories, which are very civic, traditionally civic, and what will go on top, which to me is a question.
Yeah.
For the next phase.
Yeah, glad I left it blank.
But for spring break.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what will be that dialogue between those components?
Yeah.
Because making a big plate tower, or two big plate towers, is a little bit different than making a couple of grand stories in neoclassical language.
I think one thing
I
you
don't
can
have
do
the
is,
answer.
if you're following that logic of trying to define what you're doing for the lower parts and the upper towers, is maybe be a little more flexible with the definitions of what is more contemporary and traditional. Because even what we call traditional now was avant-garde and contemporary in its time. But only the best examples have survived. There are many really terrible traditional buildings that have been torn down. Only the best ones have remained to show us what was there. But I think if you do a little bit of research, you know, Norman Foster and Zaha Hadid have done great insertions, contemporary insertions or additions to traditional buildings, where David Chipperfield has done many a contemporary building that follows the rhythm or the language of an arcade, but it doesn't need to be traditional to have an axis. It doesn't need to be traditional to have symmetry or visual balance. But I think you can loosen up those definitions of what's traditional and modern, because that's why I told you about your section. This is actually really compelling. This is not a traditional building at all, but it's really cool what you can do to blend the traditional building with maybe a contemporary program. So give yourself some wiggle room.
And maybe that creates the richness of the next phase of design, which is the dialogue between whatever language you choose for the tower, and whether that permeates or expresses itself in the lower floors as well, or aspects of it, so that you have that dialogue going between the two.
I think if I'm just following on what all of you are saying, go to that last view, one of your last views. No, not that one. This one. I particularly, I find it very engaging, the scale of your podium with Borough Hall and the portico on Borough Hall. And there's this nice connection. It actually kind of even brings that nasty thing they're carrying down into it. But you know, there's something that makes a nice visual connection there. And the fact that those two boxes are sitting on top of it, it could be anything. You know, it could be contemporary. It could be somehow bringing and one thing I like about doing something more traditional is it sort of takes the historic landmark part of downtown Brooklyn Heights where the towers are, and you've got these kind of floating buildings, which are the Borough Hall and the Federal Building, and now it kind of locks all of that in together around, you know, using this language, architectural language, around your plaza. So, I mean, that's you know, I'm not necessarily, it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just, it's something that I can see, so.
I'll make this comment about the plaza. I know that this is architecture school and this is maybe more architecture driven, but you talked about creating that edge condition with the additional colonnade on the side. And I would say this for all the students, but it doesn't need to be architecture, right? You have an archive in your building. Maybe what creates the edge are panels that have an exterior exhibit about archive material that gets people interested and then invites them up to your archive. Or maybe it's a really nice landscaped edge, or maybe it's public art, but there's any number of solutions to create an edge that complements your program, but it doesn't need to be a column.
This picture, biggest spot is blank, right? And I want to know what's happening in that biggest spot. It's kind of a little, I think you write about the lines and the perspectives, this does that, but that's a huge design project, that plaza there, and you can't just leave it blank.
And you're assuming it's all level.
Yeah,
It's like,
it's not gonna be level.
It's just a down, and if you go up as you're going, you can also go down to some degree, subways, other things underground, but, you know, from seeing all these projects back in December, I'm still intrigued by the underground life that exists under Borough Hall, which could be, you know, illuminated, literally and figuratively, in a way, you know, it's a separate project really from what you're doing, but your comment on this one datum, wouldn't solve this end, but downtown Borough Hall, there's a lot that can be done to create that discourse. Maybe an aside, I mean, I think the big question is on the building itself.
I think
In terms of the.
for the final, you wanna address all of these things, right? You can't, you know, you got a huge plaza there, and right now it's just a big surface, so, you know, part of it'll be bringing the market into it, but.
Well, it could also be interesting, the bow tie that you created, there's the other view that you have from behind Borough Hall looking back this way.
Yeah.
X.
Well, no, it was at eye level. Yeah, it was that one. This side could be much different because this is where you start to get to the complexities of what's below ground versus what's above ground. And the other side is more, you know, extension of Howden Plaza Park. But I think the coming together of the kind of the knot of the bow tie is a really interesting place, and maybe that's where you want to think about down below the street as opposed to above the street. Place to, you know, draw that line, so to speak. I'm being vague because I don't know how to do this, but I do think, you know, if it's all just one big surface that goes through, that's maybe a little less interesting than you're channeled through to a point and then you're open up to another point. And this is kind of the density of downtown Brooklyn, and then you open up towards Gatlin Plaza and you're getting into vista towards the bridge.
That's right there.
There's a tower on the federal building.
So you have, what, a few weeks left, right? And I think what we're saying is your master plan has a lot of great bones. It makes sense. You're on the right path. You probably can't develop the entire plaza. That could be an entire studio for a landscape architect. But there are parts of the plaza that can support what you're trying to do in the architecture. So you might be able to find either a program or structural interventions or playing with those levels. You can't do all of it, but find things that work for what you're trying to present. And even if it's a suggestion of what a few pieces could be, or like the nexus of the bow tie or whatnot is, you know, you can start to suggest what those things would be. You may not get to all of it, but we need to, you know, express the dots so people can start to connect those dots and what you're suggesting.
Well, I'm going to Washington DC this Thursday, and I specifically wanted to go there to kind of see if my hypothesis is right, if like these big monumental things do make it so the civic places are like a thoroughfare But I hope, I see places that inspire me to think about like how this program influenced the public space that's outside of the program. And yeah, I think this hardscape thing right here is a big part of what my goal is for this thesis.
So there's one building I would suggest, which is the National Portrait Gallery, which was a federal building constructed in two different buildings that are very traditional. And there's a Norman Foster insertion that has a huge modern canopy over what was a previous open air courtyard. So it shows the traditional with the contemporary together. I think there's a lot of relation for what you're trying to create in your colonnade. But I think it'll show a little bit of an example of what you're trying to do.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's keep going, because we have 5 more. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, yeah.